Magandang araw po mga Facts Natics. Ako po si Christian Esguera and welcome po sa ating episode ngayong araw dito po sa ating Facts First Convos. We are recording this episode on the 8th anniversary of our landmark victory dun po sa Permanent Court of Arbitration. So, July 12, 2024 po today. Ang kasama po natin is eksperto pagdating po sa Asia and China. He spent a decade working as an editor dun po sa Global Times. And maganda pong malaman natin yung perspective niya dito po sa ongoing tension sa West Philippine Sea. We'll talk about how the government is approaching the issue and how much really do we understand about the so-called enemy or China. So I'd like to welcome to our Facts First Convo si Mr. David Nye.
Thank you very much, Christian. It's a pleasure joining you here.
Thank you for joining us dito sa Facts First Convo.
Yes.
Okay. You spent 10 years at Global Times, okay?
Yes.
So talk about first Global Times, how you got there.
Global Times is part of the nationalist wing. You know, there are several factions, obviously, within the Communist Party. Just like any political organization, they have several factions. And our Global Times is part of the nationalist wing, which is closely identified with Xi Jinping, because they're the nationalist wing. They're not the moderates. The moderates are the other side. All right, the Hu Jintao, the previous group. Now, this is run by the propaganda department of the Communist Party of China. All right. Now, I got there because I was recommended by a former colleague of mine who worked with me at Blue Ocean Network. That was a semi-private network based in Beijing. That's how I came to work for the Global Times, based on a recommendation. I guess because of my background in news, my background as a journalist, and all these things, and being a sub-editor and all, and working abroad, working in Singapore, Hong Kong as well. So all this landed me in Global Times. Now, I was together with other foreign editors, of course, mostly from Western countries, from the U.S., from the U.K., Australia, Scotland. You know, mostly I was the only so-called non-white editor from a non-white country.
Okay.
And the irony of it all was I was the one chosen to edit the front page and the op-ed page.
Oh, how was it editing a Communist Party organ?
Well, to be clear, they call it a newspaper, but for all intents and purposes, it's pure propaganda. I'm speaking as a journalist, and I know the difference between propaganda and news and journalism.
So how was it like?
Basically, for me, it was a learning experience. It was good to work there. Call me a Trojan horse, because basically that's what I was, essentially a Trojan horse. I wanted to know the insides of the Communist Party, and what better way than through the propaganda arm, at least one of the instruments of the propaganda arm. And so I used that, especially and knowing at the time when the Philippines and China were engaged in this tit for tat in the South China
You
Sea.
spent a decade with the Global Times.
Yes.
So, kailan yung time frame na ito?
This was 2012, so this was about the time Xi Jinping took power.
Yeah.
So it was actually the perfect storm, because Xi Jinping actually changed the dynamics of the leadership of China.
So you went there 2012. Was it before the Scarborough standoff or after?
It must have been before the Scarborough standoff, I think, yes.
So you spent the next 10 years with Global Times.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And it is a good time because it is the time also when President Duterte was president. And so I also learned about the dynamics of how China views Duterte as opposed to Noynoy Aquino. Because they would constantly talk to me about this and ask me a lot of questions.
When you say they, who were they?
These were
Your colleagues
the
at
the communist officials who were assigned to Global Times, the staff, other officers, other editors of the Global Times, Chinese editors. I'm not talking with the foreigners, I'm talking with the Chinese editors. They asked me a lot of questions. Because they were very curious because of Noynoy, because they knew I was from Ateneo. They also found out that I was 1 year after Noynoy at Ateneo. We were only 1 year apart in Ateneo.
You were older or he was
Younger. He's older by 1 year. He's the classmate of my brother, actually.
So they were curious about the transition from Noynoy Aquino to Duterte.
Duterte,
The sudden
that's right.
shift.
That's right, sudden
Okay.
shift. And from what I gathered was they liked Duterte a lot. I mean, It was unanimous.
Obviously.
It was unanimous compared to Noy Noy Aquino, actually.
In your personal dealings with the Chinese officials or even party officials,
Right.
how exactly at that time did they find President Duterte?
They liked him a lot. They said he was very cooperative.
That was the term.
They said it was harmonious. It was a harmonious relationship.
And what was their description of the previous president?
What they said about Noy Noy was he was difficult to deal with because he was tied up to the U.S.
That was their perspective.
That was their perspective. So remember, China doesn't have any real friends. What China has are lackeys and vassals. All right? And so now they're complaining, for example, you see them always complain that whenever Japan makes a deal, like Japan made a deal with the Philippines recently, they always warn about the past. They always talk about they love to talk about the past, what you did in the past. They ask Japan to reflect, and the Chinese, they love to use the word reflect, to reflect on the past, what you did in history, what you did in the past. When in reality, Japan's past is very different from Japan now.
Yeah.
But they love to do that. They love to cite history all the time.
Before we go deep into that Chinese mentality or ideology in terms of approaching this issue in the West Philippine Sea, let's talk about I'm curious about your job as an editor. What exactly does an editor of a Communist Party organization? You actually edit as an editor?
As an editor, basically, my primary job was to fix their grammar.
Because this was the English version of People's Daily, if I'm not mistaken.
The English version of Global Times Chinese.
Okay.
All right? Which is under People's Daily, that's right. But this is the more popular version of the Chinese news. Because People's Daily is not nearly as popular as Global Times.
But how about the content? Did you have any leeway or elbow room in terms of editing?
I would change some of the stuff, and then they would really get back to me pretty strong. I mean, they would say, where did you get that?
So I can imagine how you covered, for instance, or how you handled stories about the Scarborough Show stand-ups.
Right. I mean, I would tell them, basically, I would get into discussions and conversations with them about this, but they would always come back to me, in China. They love to use the term in China.
Which actually meant what?
Which meant that's their bias, their line, their narrative. So they always say, in China, it's like this.
Was it condescending somehow?
Yeah, definitely. Because always in China, it's like this. In China, it's like this. Just like when I said China and Taiwan. Oh, no, Taiwan is a province of China. Well, I said, outside of China, I guarantee you, it's China and Taiwan, I said.
So how long were you able to? You put up with this for a decade?
I put it because I had to know, I wanted to know about them. It was part of my wanting to know how they think, because I felt that this was a critical time in history. It was good that I was there. It was a perfect storm. Things were happening between China and the Philippines. And so I felt that one day, I had a hunch one day this would all come to good use.
Okay. Pero was there a moment, let's say, during your stint with the Global Times where somehow you felt parang nakukoopta kayo?
No, never.
You're being convinced somehow?
They could never convince me. I'm extremely independent-minded. They can't. What I do, I took mental notes all the time. It's very difficult to indoctrinate me, or you can, it may take you a million years before you can do that.
Okay. Let's go straight to the issues, because sometimes when we talk about the West Philippine Sea, some people get to be tied up with certain perspectives or ideologies. Let's start with what you see most Filipinos, even officials or policymakers, are getting wrong about the Chinese thinking in terms of approaching this issue.
What they're getting wrong, I think, first of all, is I think that they think that China is so powerful, so big, that it can just overwhelm us, that we are absolutely no match. We can't do anything to push them back. I think that's the predominant thinking, which is wrong. Because I don't think they understand the Chinese psyche.
What is the Chinese psyche?
The Chinese psyche basically is, I've always said this, I've learned, being there for 10 years, is that only two things are important to them. One is saving face.
Reputation.
Yes. And it's more than that. It's almost metaphysical almost, it's hard to describe, but In a nutshell, it's saving face.
Parang hiya.
Yes,
Okay.
something like that.
And number 2
But
is?
something a lot deeper than that.
Okay.
Number 2 is material wealth. That's why I keep on telling people here that all this talk about war, like China is going to attack Taiwan, China is going to attack the Philippines, that's not going to happen.
Why?
For fear of losing face.
In case that actually happens.
Yes.
How?
Because we have to study history. China ventured into getting involved in a war the last time was in the Korean War. Right? And they came in strong in defense of North Korea. Guess what? They lost a lot of soldiers. They lost a lot.
It didn't go.
They didn't expect that. They didn't expect that. And ever since then, they've always been in the background. You know, they've always been in the background. And as they've grown economically and militarily, it is now that Xi Jinping's time, they are trying to flex their muscles. But in a different way. It's all for show. Because they have to show the domestic audience. Everything they do now is for the domestic audience.
Everything they do in the West Philippines.
Yes, or anywhere else in the world, for example, is a show that, well, we are justifying our rule over you, essentially. We are legitimizing our rule over China, essentially. See what we are doing for you, you know? We're legitimizing.
They're projecting themselves before the domestic audience as a very powerful nation.
That's right.
Outside.
And they do that, and they get more aggressive as the domestic woes increase. So if you look at the situation in China right now, they get more aggressive because their woes are growing right now domestically, especially in economics. Because there is some kind of unwritten law or pact in China between the Communist Party and the people. We will give you economic bliss. Just allow us to run things the way we wish. But we don't have rights, you don't have this, you don't have that, we're going to monitor you, everything, you know. But that's a quid pro quo. We will give you economic prosperity. See? And that was the unwritten deal they made with the Chinese population.
The so-called social contract.
That's right.
Okay.
What's happening now is, wait a minute, the people, especially the younger ones, are saying, wait a minute, that doesn't look right now. If you know the numbers in China, the last time China issued numbers on unemployment was quite a few months back, when a record number of 21% of urban youth were unemployed.
21%.
That's a lot. And they announced that we're going to stop making such announcements. Again, to save face. I told you, to save face. So you can see that their property market is deteriorated, because that was the engine behind their miracle economic growth.
So they
Property market.
So they wanted a distraction for the domestic.
Of course, they always want to distract, you know, a smokescreen.
But in the meantime, we still have to deal with China in this part of the world. So
That's right. But understand, that's why we have to we should deal with it more aggressively, precisely because this is all for show.
when you say aggressively, what exactly do you mean?
Look what they do. They engage in mob rule. They don't like one-on-one, by the way. One-on-one, if you stand up to them, they will blink because of fear of losing face. One-on-one, they find themselves in a very uncompromising situation. What do? They back off and they come back, you know, Ayungin show, mob rule. You have lots of vessels there. They do it mob rule. See? Strength in numbers, yeah. That's how they do it, see? But one-on-one, they will back off. If you stand up to them, they will back off. I guarantee you.
So specifically, what are you suggesting? In terms of, let's say, dealing with China's aggression whenever we do our resupply mission?
If you study the way they've been dealing with us so far, what have they been using? Water cannons?
Big axes, knives.
Axes? Are these articles of war? No. All right? Why? They're afraid of having a military... Read between the lines. They're afraid of getting into a military conflict because they're afraid of being accused of starting a war. All right? What we should do, knowing that, we should precisely be more aggressive. Because remember, the Philippines is acting in self-defense. It is universally accepted that if there is an aggressor or intruder who trespasses, out of self-defense from the aggressor, you're allowed to use lethal force.
So we can actually shoot at them.
Not at them. We can shoot at their rubber boats.
I mean,
Like
the vessels.
Out of self-defense, yes. If they're coming as an act of aggression, I think the UN would concede that that's legitimate. Because that's universally known. That's self-defense. You know? Just like, if, for example, if the PNP issues you a gun license, right? They issue you a license to own, right? So you keep it in your house. If there's an intruder, you're allowed, as long as they're facing you, you're allowed to shoot, right? Yes. It's universally known, you know?
You think so far what China's been doing to the Philippines, in the West Philippine Sea, the water cannon attacks, the maneuvering...
You know why they do that? Because they see the Philippines' response is very ambivalent. You know, they're laughing at us when we always issue diplomatic protests. Metaphorically, I'll tell you what they're doing. See, look at it as a piece of paper, the protest, and they have a metaphorical shredder. They're shredding it.
Yeah.
And so they see, that's all you're going to do? We'll continue to intimidate you and to bully you. That's what they're doing.
But how far do you think China would go?
They're not going to get into a military conflict, no. If you use firearms and fire at their rubber boats, they're going to run away. I guarantee you.
Why?
Look, a simple thing like the floating barrier. Look, a simple thing like that. We cut it. What did they do? Nothing. Because they lost face. If you stand up to them, they will back off.
So the typical approach in terms of standing up to a bully applies here.
Oh, absolutely. Look what Indonesia did. For my perfect example always is what our neighbor and friend Indonesia has done against China in the history. Widodo was a perfect example. He got fed up with all the illegal Chinese fishing. He rounded up all the illegal Chinese vessels and blew them up on live national television. What did China do? They lost face. To save face, they built Indonesia's first high-speed railway from Bandung to Jakarta. To show the world, see, we're magnanimous, we're a world leader, we help, That's all, that's saving face.
During your stint with the National Security Council, did you actually make such recommendations to be more aggressive?
Absolutely.
And how did they respond to your suggestions?
Dr. Carlos was livid with rage. I mean, she didn't like it at all. We got into quite a few arguments, actually. She actually accused me of being a Washington narrative. Publicly.
Okay.
Yeah, which I resented, you know. Because I'm just following the facts. I told you I've been a journalist for over 4 decades. I understand objectivity and being impartial.
But from the perspective of strategic communications, how do you make sure that your proposal to be more aggressive in terms of dealing with China, it won't fall into that narrative being used by the propagandists against the Philippines and the United States that we are the ones trying to instigate the war?
Well, basically, we're saying this is our decision. You know, we are doing this because we are doing it out of self-defense. And we are willing to do, and we warn you not to try us and to test us because the United Nations is going to support us if we conduct anything that is deemed as in support of self-defense. All right? Right? That's it. And then keep it open-ended after that. Don't say exactly what you're going to do. Don't telegraph your intentions, your moves, nothing. Your actions, your plan. Don't telegraph. Just leave it at that. And let them think. Because one thing China hates is being kept in the dark. They hate that.
They hate ambivalence.
Or they hate being kept in the dark.
Not knowing anything.
Yeah, if you don't tell them we're going to do this, they'll say, what are they going to... They hate that. What are you going to do? Oh, they hate that.
I am in a guessing game.
Of course, they hate that.
That's a common nature, the basic nature naman.
Yeah, but in their sense, because they feel that they've arrived, to them it's like losing face, you see.
Meron tayong tinatawag na Transparency Initiative for the
Right.
administration. What do you think of this? Transparency Initiative when it comes to the West Philippine Sea, expose everything that China is doing, and some people actually describe it as some, in a way, parang paawa strategy by the government.
No, we have to expose what they're doing. I absolutely agree, but we have to go beyond that, as I've said. Words and actions must be consistent. Just like when I lectured before, and I used to be a lecturer for communications and public relations before, I said my philosophy regarding PR, public relations, is the perception and the reality, the P and the R must be as close to each other as possible. That's perfect PR. That's what we should do. Perception and reality must be the same. So perception, if we keep on saying this, okay, what's the reality to back up the perception? That has to be consistent with the perception. If you say China doing this, doing that, okay, what are you going to do?
Okay.
But don't announce that.
Yeah.
But we must be prepared to respond to the illegal acts of the aggression of China.
Okay, speaking of consistency, we're dealing with China. They're willing to play the very long game, no? It's a Chinese market.
China is always like that, always long game.
But for the Philippines, we're bound by restrictions of term limits. For instance, every 6 years, pwede maiba yung strategy by the government. So the past 6 years, we were very, very friendly to China. The next administration, somehow the
No, what we are against, let's make this clear. What we are against is their bullying activities. All right? Obviously, we understand the world geopolitics, that we have to be as diplomatic to each other as possible. They're not our enemy, but what they're doing is wrong. And based on what they're doing, we have to respond aggressively to teach them a lesson.
But if you're China, would it be better for you to just wait for the next administration?
That's what they're doing.
And hope that is friendly again to you.
That's what they're doing. But that's why we have to be consistent. That's exactly their advantage. Their advantage is they have a continuum.
Yeah.
Right? Our disadvantage is the change of...
You have a very short shelf life for this.
But at least we have to do something to make them think twice. Well, that applies as well to other countries, doesn't it? Look at Indonesia. Widodo is gone, but this new guy, what did he do? He slapped a 200% tariff on Chinese imports. Yeah. It's the same thing. It's a different guy now. That's what I mean. The Philippines must learn from the likes of Indonesia. That there is this whoever assumes power has to be consistent, must accept that certain things China does are unacceptable. And therefore the response has to be consistent. See?
In this conflict with China, another important layer is propaganda. So far, what do you think of this? How do you think the Philippines is faring? Are we losing or winning it?
Propaganda, some say we're winning, some say we're losing, but China is a well-funded propaganda machine. Again, you see, Christian, this goes back to many things Filipinos don't understand. It all starts with UN Resolution 2758. I've always stressed that. And that's regarding the legitimacy of who runs China in 1951. And the UN voted at that time that the People's Republic of China is a legitimate ruler of China. And not the Chiang Kai-shek forces anymore.
The nationalists.
The nationalists, the Kuomintang. But that's where the problem begins, because if you read that short resolution, it makes no mention, absolutely no mention, of the status of Taiwan. It just talks about who runs China, period.
Is that exactly a declaration categorically of the One China policy?
That is the basis for the international One China policy. Now, China's propaganda is they're conflating it. They're trying to confuse the world by coming up with their One China principle, what they call the One China principle, trying to use that as that's One China policy. No, it's not. It's just theirs. It's their propaganda, because One China principle, as far as they're concerned, means that Taiwan is a province of China. And they said many times that that's based on Resolution 2758. If only people bothered to read Resolution 2758, which is so short, there's absolutely no mention of the status of Taiwan.
Let's go to the incident last June 17. So we were attacked by pickaxes and knives.
That's right.
Some people are describing that as a very unfortunate or embarrassing incident for the Philippines.
To us, yes.
How did you see it?
It was bad. It showed, to me, it showed weakness again. It showed ambivalence, it showed weakness. It showed that we refuse to stand up to China. You have to. As I've said already, China hates to lose face. And they will not use They will not engage in a military conflict. You notice when they claimed that they saw our sailors as guns, they were panicking.
Really?
Yes, they were making a lot of noise in the press. Oh, they have guns. Oh, they have guns. You know, they're afraid of guns. Trust me.
Duwag ang China sa baret?
Yes, because in China nobody owns guns.
So that's
I
also
know.
part of their psyche?
Yeah, yeah. They're afraid of it. All right, I told you they're afraid to get into military conflict. They're paranoid about firearms, military hardware. What they're good at is selling military hardware to Russia for the Ukraine invasion. That's what they do. Like I told you, saving face and making lots of money. That's China. Okay, that's it.
So if that is true, yung dalawang very important things for China, a full-blown war or an actual conflict,
Yeah,
also
military conflict. Yeah, they don't want that. They're not going to get into that now.
they would also lose money because of that, right?
They will lose money. You see, like in the Taiwan case, for example, which is connected to this one, the Taiwan scenario. Remember, those in the military now in China, soldiers and things like that, troops, okay? These are the guys, this is the generation who benefited hugely from China's economic miracle. They have money. All these soldiers now in China, they have money. Officers, they have lots of money. They are not going to risk their lives to lose that because they value money, material wealth so much. So,
Even over this.
as I said, in the unlikely event that Taiwan is invaded, they're not going to use Chinese troops. The one who owes them a lot and entirely is North Korea. My hunch, and I've said this already sometimes, they will use North Korean troops in Chinese uniforms, pretend they're Chinese troops, and use Chinese arms to attack Taiwan. In the unlikely event, as I said, unlikely event, but definitely not Chinese troops.
Okay. Another problem that they're facing is the Pogo,
Oh, the gambling. Yeah.
yung Pogo hubs. So how bad is the situation from your perspective?
I'm saying that
In connection with
China,
what's happening with the West Philippines.
China has made very deep inroads in Philippine society. They have driven a wedge in our political and economic and financial system already. All right, and there are many surrogates of theirs here, whom they have paid either through business deals or outright bribes. I've said this also. You know, I know it's a very risky thing to say, but I say it with a lot of conviction. Okay, because I know it's happening. Yeah, China, what they do is they use certain templates over their history because of their system of rote memory. So they're only told, they're ordered, okay, do this, memorize this, and do this. That's what they do. They're very poor at critical thinking, but they're good at following orders. A basic informational template. And what they're doing now is they have drawn out again their 14th century template of how to do things, and they're applying it to modern times. That's all they're doing, really.
Okay. Mr. David Knight, thank you very much for joining
Thank you
us.
very much, Kristen.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
That's our episode for today for our Facts First Convos. Ako po si Christian Esqueda. Maraming salamat.